The truth about prison tattoos, what they really mean. The shouting inside the California prison yard started so fast that no one had time to understand what was happening. Officers rushed toward a group of inmates who had surrounded a man lying on the concrete. His shirt was torn, his face was bleeding, and on his neck were the numbers 13 in dark blue ink, a tattoo that carried a meaning far more dangerous than most people outside prison ever realize. One officer yelled, move back now!" But the inmates stood still, silent, staring. They weren't just watching a fight, they were waiting to see if the man on the ground would live or die. His tattoo had already spoken for him. Inside this prison, ink wasn't decoration, it was identity, it was loyalty, it was threat, and sometimes it was a death sentence. As the injured man tried to speak, another inmate whispered, "He shouldn't have worn that 13, not here." That was the moment the truth became clear. This wasn't a random attack. It was punishment. It was a message. And it was all because of a tattoo. Right as the officers forced the crowd back, an inmate with a spiderweb tattoo on his elbow stepped forward. His face was calm, almost too calm. "He lied," he said. He marked himself as something he isn't. The spiderweb tattoo, which many people think means prison time, actually meant something darker in this place. It marked a person with a violent past, someone proud of what they had done. When he spoke, other inmates listened. But before the officers could question him, the yard went silent. Every inmate froze. Something was happening, and it was bigger than the attack they had just stopped. From the far end of the yard, a tall man walked forward. He had tattoos running across his chest and arms, all done in dark, homemade ink. A black teardrop sat under his left eye. In movies, a teardrop is just a symbol, but in real US prisons, it has real history, sometimes meaning a lost loved one, sometimes meaning the wearer had taken a life. That man was known inside the facility for the second meaning. He stopped walking and looked down at the injured inmate. The whole yard waited. Even the officers watched closely. No one knew what he was going to say, and no one wanted to move first. He pointed at the 13 tattoo and said, "That mark belongs to the Serenos. He's not one of them." Every inmate understood instantly. A 13 tattoo isn't random. It is tied to the Mexican Mafia, also known as La M, one of the most powerful prison gangs in the United States. You don't wear that tattoo unless you have permission. If you lie about it, there are consequences. In real prison history, several attacks, including cases in California, Arizona, and Texas, have taken place because inmates falsely claimed gang ties through tattoos. It is considered disrespect. It is considered betrayal. It can get someone killed. The officers placed the injured man on a stretcher, but the tall inmate stepped forward again. "This is not over," he said, looking directly at the younger prisoners watching. "Ink always tells the truth."
Then he walked away as calmly as he had arrived, disappearing back into the crowd. And just like that, the yard returned to normal, but the tension stayed. Everyone now understood the message. If a tattoo lies, the person wearing it pays the price. As the officers pushed the stretcher through the gate, the inmate with the spiderweb tattoo leaned toward another prisoner and said, "They'll finish the job. Maybe not today, but soon." His voice was low, but the fear in the other inmate's eyes was clear. Inside the medical room, the injured man tried to explain. "I didn't lie," he said weakly. "I got the tattoo on the street. I didn't know." But that excuse never works. In the real world, people outside prison might think tattoos are just art or style. But inside American prisons, every line of ink holds a story, a crime, a loyalty, a promise, or a threat. No one gets a tattoo without understanding what it means, and no one is forgiven for choosing the wrong one. The nurse stepped away to call security, and the man closed his eyes. His breathing was shaky. He could hear officers talking outside the room. "Gang coordinator wants to question him," one said. "He might need protective custody," another added. "Doesn't matter," the third officer replied. "Word is already spreading." For a moment, everything seemed calm. Too calm. The man on the bed opened his eyes, staring at the buzzing light above him. He whispered, "They're coming back for me." He wasn't wrong. Just as he finished speaking, an emergency alert echoed through the building. Doors slammed shut. Officers started running again. Something had happened in another part of the prison. Something connected to the tattoos, the lies, and the message sent in the yard. What happened next would change everything. And it was only the beginning. The alarm kept ringing through the prison, a long, sharp sound that made the walls feel tighter and the air feel heavier. Officers rushed past each other, shouting orders. Inmates were locked inside their cells, staring through the bars, waiting to hear what happened. But everyone already suspected the same thing. The attack on the man with the 13 tattoo had set something bigger in motion. Down in the medical wing, the injured inmate tried to lift his head when he heard the alarm. His heart started beating faster. "It's about me, isn't it?" he whispered, but no one answered him. The nurse had left, and two officers stood at the door, watching the hallway instead of watching him. A voice came over the radio. "We have a situation on the East Block, gang-related, possible retaliation." The officers looked at each other. The injured man heard it too. His eyes widened. He tried to sit up, but his body was too weak. He could only listen as the officers suddenly pushed the door open and left the room. For a few seconds, he was alone, completely alone. He stared at the walls, at the cold metal table, at the dim light above him. Every sound in the hallway felt louder. A footstep, a door closing, a voice whispering. His breathing got faster. He knew exactly what was happening. When a gang wanted to send a message, they didn't wait, they didn't forget, and they didn't care if the person was injured, scared, or begging for help. A shadow moved just outside the room. He froze. The shadow moved again, slower this time, closer. Then a second shadow appeared. The door handle started to shake. He whispered, "Please, no!" Before the door could open, officers shouted from the hallway, "Back away! Hands where we can see him!" Boots hit the floor, keys rattled, radios clicked, doors slammed shut again. Whoever was at the door disappeared. For a moment, the man felt relief, but it didn't last, because all across the prison, something else was happening. Something bigger than him, bigger than the fight in the yard, bigger than one tattoo. The gangs were talking.
Inside the East Block, two officers had found markings scratched into the wall of a shower room. A small 3-dot tattoo symbol, known in U.S. prisons to mean "Mi vida loca," or "my crazy life." It's used by gang members to show they live outside the rules of society. But today, that symbol meant something else, a warning. Under the 3 dots, someone had written a single word in pencil: "Tonight." The message spread quickly. Within minutes, officers knew this wasn't random, it was coordinated. And when a gang inside an American prison sends a warning, history shows that violence usually follows. Real cases in California, Texas, and Georgia have shown that a simple tattoo can become the spark that starts a full-blown prison war. Back in his cell on the West Block, the tall inmate with the black teardrop tattoo sat silently on his bunk. Another prisoner approached him and whispered, "Word is, they're moving him to protective custody." The tall man didn't look up. "He can move him anywhere they want," he said. "He already broke the rule. The ink he wears is a promise he can't keep." The other prisoner nodded nervously. In this prison, tattoos were like documents, proof of loyalty, proof of crimes, proof of who you belong to. If you wore something you didn't earn, you weren't seen as confused. You were seen as disrespecting the entire gang. The tall man finally stood. His arms were covered in ink, gang symbols, years served, lost friends, violent memories. Each tattoo told a story. None of them were artistic or decorative. They were warnings.
They were history. They were instructions. He looked toward the hallway. "Call a meeting," he said. The prisoner hesitated. "Now? Now." Meanwhile, inside the control room, officers watched camera screens nervously. Inmate movement was increasing. Groups were whispering across cells. Messages were being sent through hand signals and short notes. One officer said, "This is building fast." Another answered, "Too fast." The warden was called. The gang intelligence unit was alerted. A lockdown was considered, then rejected, because lockdowns can sometimes make gangs move faster instead of slowing down. The injured man in the medical room lay still, staring at the ceiling. He whispered to himself, "Why did I get the tattoo? Why did I think it wouldn't matter?" But it did matter. In real American prisons, tattoos are more than marks. They are language. They show where you stand, who protects you, who wants to hurt you, and what you've done. Tattoos like spiderwebs, clocks with no hands, teardrops, crowns, numbers, and symbols all have meanings based on decades of real cases. The door suddenly opened again. Officers walked in quickly and lifted the stretcher. "We're moving you," one said. "Where?" he asked, panicking. "To segregation, for your safety." But as they rolled him down the hallway, a group of inmates inside their cells started shouting, "You can't hide! That tattoo won't save you! This is just the start!" The officers moved faster. But halfway down the hall, everything stopped. The radios went silent. Then, a voice crackled through. "Emergency on the upper tier. Gang leaders meeting near cell 217. Possible planning underway." The officers froze. The injured man realized they were planning something big, something deadly. As the officers turned the stretcher around, alarms started blaring again. The sound echoed through every part of the prison. The man whispered, trembling, "They're coming! They're coming tonight!" And just before the officers pushed him into the elevator, a loud crash exploded somewhere above them. Something had started, and this time, there was no stopping it. The crash from the upper tier shook the whole building. Dust fell from the ceiling. Officers shouted into their radios, and the sound of metal striking metal echoed through the halls. Whatever the gangs were planning, it had already begun. Inside the elevator, the injured man grabbed the side rail with trembling hands. "Please, don't leave me alone," he whispered. But the officers weren't listening. Their eyes were fixed upward, toward the sound of the chaos spreading across the prison. When the elevator doors opened, the lights flickered. The officers rushed him toward the segregation wing, but every few steps, someone yelled from behind a cell door, "You can't run from ink! They're coming for everyone! This is about the 13!" The man shut his eyes. Every shout felt like another weight on his chest. His tattoo, the one he had gotten outside prison, thinking it looked tough, had now become a target, a symbol that he had claimed a loyalty he didn't have. In the outside world, tattoos can be fashion. Inside U.S. prisons, they can be life or death. Before they reached the segregation gate, an officer's radio crackled. "Gang leaders are refusing orders. Multiple groups gathering near the stairs. Lockdown now. Lockdown." The officers froze. "Do we push him into seg?" one asked. "No time. We need backup first." They backed into a corner, blocking the injured man with their bodies. The hallway felt too quiet now, too still, like the silence before a storm. Then the shouting began.
Dozens of voices, from above, from both sides, from the stairs. Feet running across metal walkways, keys jingling, doors slamming. An officer yelled something, but his voice was swallowed by the noise. The gangs were moving. In real prison riots across the U.S., from California to Mississippi to Oklahoma, violence often spreads in minutes, sometimes seconds. A single spark becomes a fire. A single tattoo becomes a trigger. The injured man pressed his back against the wall. His breathing turned fast and sharp. He whispered, "I didn't mean to disrespect anyone. I didn't know." But the truth was simple. Prisons don't care about excuses. Tattoos have rules, and rules have consequences. Suddenly, 3 inmates appeared at the end of the hallway. They weren't running. They were walking slowly, side by side, like they had all the time in the world. One had a spider web on his elbow. Another had a black crown on his wrist, a real symbol tied to gang hierarchy in several US prisons. The third had no shirt on, and across his chest was a giant tattoo of a skull with wings. He recognized him instantly. It was the tall inmate from the yard, the one with the teardrop. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. He looked almost calm. The officers stepped forward, blocking the path. "Back up," one shouted. "Turn around." But the tall inmate didn't move. He looked directly at the injured man. "In here," he said quietly, "your skin tells the truth, whether you like it or not." The officers raised their batons, their hands shook. Even they knew this wasn't just a small confrontation. This was about control, respect, territory. Tattoos were only the beginning. Then the loudspeaker crackled overhead. Full lockdown. All inmates to the ground. All units respond. The tall inmate stared at the speaker for a moment, then he smiled. Because he knew something the officers didn't. Behind him, more inmates appeared, more tattoos, more messages written in ink. Numbers, symbols, letters, tears, crowns, dots, real markings tied to decades of American prison gang history. Officers shouted into their radios. "More coming from the upper tier. They're pushing forward. We need support now." But it was too late. A loud bang exploded somewhere behind the officers. Maybe a door being forced open, maybe something thrown. The hallway filled with yelling and running, and the echo of fists hitting metal. The officers grabbed the stretcher and pushed it toward the gate with all their strength. "Open it! Open it now!" one screamed. The gate buzzed, sliding open slowly, too slowly. The inmates were getting closer. The tall man took another step, his eyes locked on the tattoo he believed was a lie. The injured man cried, "Please, please don't let them get me." The officer shoved the stretcher through the gate and ran in behind it. One slammed his hand on the emergency button. The steel bars slid shut, just in time. The tall inmate reached the gate and slammed his hand against the bars. "You can hide in there, but ink doesn't hide, and everyone in this place now knows who you're not." The injured man collapsed backward. He could barely breathe. He could barely think. The officers pulled him toward the far corner as more alarms exploded through the prison. Inside the block behind the gate, the riot grew. Officers fought to regain control. Inmates shouted. Orders were lost in the noise. Tattoo meanings, centuries of codes and symbols, had just started a chain reaction. And somewhere inside that chaos, the message spread. If you wear a tattoo you didn't earn, the truth will find you. The man looked down at the 13 on his neck. The ink was still fresh, still dark, still marking him as something he wasn't. He whispered, shaking, "Why did I do this?" The prison roared with noise. Officers rushed past, cells slammed. The night grew louder and louder until it felt like the walls themselves were shaking. And as the chaos rose, one truth became painfully clear. In the world outside, tattoos tell stories, but inside American prisons, tattoos decide fate.